How's it going, everybody? Welcome to Drawing Conclusions. I am Cameron Holt.
And I'm Samantha Zuckerman.
And today we're going to talk about some true crime and the paranormal.
Mm-hmm.
And we're also going to draw some pictures.
Yeah, well, you're going to draw some pictures.
Yeah, a picture. One picture.
I'm going to talk. I'm doing the easy part. Today we're talking about changelings.
Ooh. I assume you don't mean the Dungeons and Dragons playable race.
No, but yes, the Dungeons and Dragons race is based on these, clearly. I don't cover it, but you'll probably pretty easily be able to tell, like, where that comes from.
Mm-hmm. You'll probably also be able to hear Chloe occasionally chirping in her meows as we speak, because we just can't be rid of this demon cat.
Rather, she's keeping the demons away.
Yeah, I guess. By trapping them inside of her own skin.
That's how cats do it, actually. People say that cats keep demons away, but actually they're just absorbing them. Mm-hmm. And that's why she lives so long.
Chloe, can you say hello?
Are you ready to dive in?
Yeah, let's go for it.
Okay, so changelings are believed to be fairies who, for some reason, kidnapped human children to either replace them themselves or to replace them with their children, etc., etc.
Okay, so is there like a basis in Irish folklore?
There's a basis in a lot of cultures' folklore. So the Irish, Wales, Nigeria has a version of the changeling. It has a different word. Germany has them pretty much all across Europe, and then other cultures have similar creatures or beings.
Okay.
Europe is the one that believes that they're fairies specifically. Other cultures believe that they're demons or evil spirits. Some believe that they're trolls, which, from what I read, the trolls kind of seem to be the fairies, quote unquote. Like, if you look at pictures, they look like little imp men.
With the little pointy hair. And the big jewel belly buttons.
Yeah, they're like these... No. Like, they're little pointy guys with, like, little gremlins.
Okay.
So they're not, like, trolls like I would think of a troll being, like, a big green ogre-y kind of thing.
Yeah, like a big, like, boil-covered...
Yeah, no, they're teeny tiny little... They look like cats a little bit.
Okay, so kind of like a goblin-esque...
Yes.
Scenario.
Goblin in nature. So there's a ton of...
Sorry, this is unrelated. I wonder if trolls are technically goblinoids.
But what are big?
Yeah, because you've got goblins, and then hobgoblins, and then bugbears are goblinoids.
And then you just go one step bigger.
Yeah. And
you got a troll.
Maybe so. Probably not.
Maybe.
But it's a thought.
Could be. So, because there are variations of the changeling across cultures, there's different ways of telling whether or not you have a changeling on your hands. Mm-hmm. In Irish folklore, it's super obvious, apparently, because changelings don't grow, so they'll stay kind of baby-sized forever.
Yeah, that would be an indicator of something being a little off.
But if you can't tell from that, don't you worry, because usually they have beards and long teeth.
Oh, okay.
You know,
so just
like a baby.
Yeah, like babies do.
Like babies. I've seen a lot of babies in my time, and they usually have long teeth and beards. Everybody has a different reason why they think that human children are kidnapped and then being replaced by fairies. Mm-hmm.
What's the leading theory?
So, there's no one, like, here's the answer.
No agreed upon majority consensus.
Even in, like, one culture's folklore, there isn't one, like, here's why. Mm-hmm. Some believe that the children's were servants to, like, the fairy courts.
Mm-hmm.
Some believe that the fae are just kind of like that.
Honestly, that tracks.
Right? Like, I don't know, because we can.
Yeah. Seemed chaotic and fun.
Yeah. Some believe that the fae wanted to experience the love that human children show to their parents, because the belief is that fairies don't experience emotions in the same way that we do.
Mm-hmm.
And so their children don't love them like human children do. That one is the one I don't buy.
I can see that.
Well, but if, like, the belief is that fairies don't experience emotion in the same way, why would they care whether or not they experience the love of a human child?
Well, I mean, that makes sense, I guess. But it's like kind of a very, like, Jester and the Traveler situation of, like, he was this chaotic, and yes, I'm quoting Critical Role right now.
Yes.
But like he was this, like, weird, crazy, wild fae dude, and spoilers for Campaign 2 in the later episode. I don't know exactly what episode it's from.
Yeah.
But we have since found out that, like, he's changed since he met Jester and has experienced this overwhelming love coming from a humanoid from the material plane. It's altered his perception of he's not such a wild and crazy guy anymore. He's still pretty crazy.
We're both wild and crazy. Yeah, I guess. Okay, we'll call that one a strong maybe.
Yeah, as far as fantasy narratives, that one tracks.
Okay. One of them that I saw, like, one theory that I saw kind of tracking through multiple cultures, was that we weren't actually, like, human babies weren't being replaced with fairy babies. They were being replaced with elderly fairies.
Oh.
And the idea was that, like, once a fairy was towards the end of their life, which is still apparently most of a human life, it was so that they could live out the rest of their days with, like, comfort and love.
Yeah, so you send that old bearded baby to the human realm.
Yes. And sometimes apparently, like, the mothers would be compelled by the fairies to return this fairy back to the fae, and then the fairies would be so moved by that gesture of kindness that they would return their real baby. But that gets all complicated, and it's, like, more like, I think that they're just, like, leaving their weird kid in the woods. Yeah. I think that's more...
Their baby came out with a beard, and they just couldn't handle that.
Yeah. But there are ways of preventing fairies from stealing your real baby and replacing it with an old man. So, some legends say that if you leave, like, an inside-out coat next to your baby while they're sleeping, then the fairies won't take it.
Is that like the what is that theory that, like, vampires they have OCD, so you should, like, drop a bunch of sticks because they have to pick them up or something?
Is that vampires?
Is that vampires? I think that's
Is that
vampires.
also fairies?
Well, I mean, just because, like, the thought is that they come in and they're like, I'm gonna steal that baby, and then they see a coat that's inside out, and they're like, well, I gotta fix this, and then, like, by the time they're done, they're like, why was I here?
Well, and then...
I knew I came in here for something.
So, so the other one is worse. And it is that you just leave a pair of open iron scissors next to or suspended above your sleeping baby. So my thought is that, like, okay, babies, like, suffocate a lot in their cribs if you have, like, a bunch of loose fabric, and also if you leave open scissors next to their heads and faces.
Yeah, that seems dangerous.
What I wonder is just, like, how many medieval babies just, like, suffocated or got stabbed to death.
Oh, wait, you're supposed to leave the inside-out jacket just, like, in the crib with the baby?
Yeah, all of this stuff has to be, like, right next to the baby, because I guess, like, I don't know what the coat thing is about, but apparently it's well known, quote unquote, that fairies have an aversion to iron.
Okay, that makes sense.
Like
yes.
some cultures say like an iron like poker, like a fireplace poker.
Yeah, like how a werewolf can't touch silver.
Yeah.
Or how a Dracula can't touch...
garlic.
I was gonna say a crucifix, but sure.
I leave an open pair of garlic scissors next to your baby to prevent vampires.
The vampire fairies. It keeps them away.
Yeah. Now, if you fail to do this, like a reasonable person, you can spot a changeling. You can force them to speak to you about what they are.
The Feywild.
And for some reason, this usually involves eggs.
Okay.
So in Wales, if you cook a family meal in an eggshell, the changeling will proclaim, "I have seen the acorn before the oak, but I never saw the likes of this." And I just like to imagine a jaunty little, like, Cockney child.
Yeah.
Like, you just present them with, like, okay, here's your beans.
Oh, I've seen the acorn before the oak, but I've never seen the likes of this.
I just love it. They have a beard and long teeth.
I mean, but I feel like that's a common response if someone cooks you an entire meal inside of an eggshell. That's impressive.
I don't know.
I mean, I personally have seen the acorn before the oak, but I've never seen the likes of that.
But would you say?
I will now.
That's the only phrase. Wait, there's more though. In Spain, if you suspect you have a changeling, or it's called a zanino.
Ooh, that's
with
fun.
an X. It's Xanino.
In Spain?
Mm-hmm. You would place several pots and eggshells next to your fireplace, and the changeling will see it and say, "I was born 100 years ago, and since then I have not seen so many eggshells near the fire."
So it's like, I love the idea that these jaunty old fairies, they just like, when it comes to eggshells, they just forget themselves. It's like the sight of eggshells causes their age to take over, and they just revert back.
Especially because, like, okay, so this is a legend, this is a myth,
Yes, clearly.
but it implies that there's like this epidemic of children saying these things.
And being replaced, like, these are commonly known, I assume.
Exactly. Like, this is a thing that, like, had to happen enough times that somebody was like...
Somebody put the pieces together.
Yeah, and I'm just imagining, like, a 5-year-old in their little chair with their little, like, plastic silverware. Because, like, I'm imagining this in the time that I exist in. Like, this is medieval, but I'm imagining it in our era.
Yeah, I want to see like a late night, like a late night true crime drama about a detective who puts together and like uncovers this massive changeling plot of fairies replacing humans with their old.
It's so incredible. Germany also does the eggshell thing. If you cook a meal inside of an eggshell, a changeling child will be forced to speak its true age, thus revealing that you have a changeling.
See, that one, I feel like that's just like some weird family, and this is Germany?
Yeah.
Yeah, some weird family in Germany cooked a meal inside an eggshell, gave it to their kid sitting at the table, who's probably like 3 or 4, has been speaking English for a couple years.
Yes.
At most.
Or German.
Yeah, German. Has been speaking, I should say. Has been speaking for a couple of years at
Yes.
most. You're like, oh, how old are you? And then the kid's like, 20. And you're like, oh, that's 20. You must be a changeling. But, like, it's a kid. The kid doesn't know numbers.
Yeah, that is the most reasonable. But
I want this stated for the record. I had to look up how to count to 20 in German for that.
yeah, I think that the expectation, though, is that they'll say something like 300 because they're old.
Yeah, I am 3,000.
Yes. But because this is Germany, we can't stop at eggshells. We have to get really fucked up about it.
Mm-hmm.
So it is also said that if you have a changeling child and the eggshell thing doesn't work, which obviously it will.
Yeah, clearly.
Instead, you can just roast your kid in the oven and torture them to force them to tell you the truth. And worst case scenario, pot roast.
Yeah, I feel like that's more just fuel to prove the fact that, like, torture isn't a reliable means of getting information. Because at a certain point, anyone will say anything.
Yes.
For you to stop burning them in the oven.
It's kind of like the whole, like, if you tie up a lady and throw her in a river and she floats, she's a witch. But if she sinks to the bottom, she wasn't a witch. But whoopsie doodles. She's dead now.
Yeah. Like, what's the time frame on that? Also, is it, like,
Didn't say.
She immediately sinks? Or, like, if she sinks after an hour and a half? Like, what is...
What if she then comes back up on account of the bloat?
Yeah. If it's been weeks, like, oh, I guess she was a witch.
Yeah.
Like, gotta love medieval logic.
None of these things ever give you, like, a time frame of, like, so how long do I... what temperature do I roast this changeling?
Yeah, how hot does it have to be for a fairy to be uncomfortable?
Yeah. What is their threshold? In Nigeria, you have stories of the Ogbanji, which I did my best with, which translates directly to children who come and go. And the belief is that families who experience several, like, young children dying or, like, have several miscarriages are being followed by an evil spirit.
Okay. That's rude, but sure.
A little, right? Because, like, this is that spirit's only thing. All they do is, like, inhabit children and die.
Mm-hmm.
Seems like kind of a one-trick pony to me.
Mm-hmm.
So when children... And this is for, like, a specific culture within Nigeria. So when children in this culture die, they would be, like, marred or cut so that the spirit couldn't return. But then sometimes it still did, and so, like, babies who were born with, like, scars or, like, certain deformities to a family that had already had a child die, the idea was that, like, well, the spirit got in anyway, and so you should probably expect this child to also die.
Yikes. So, yeah, essentially just, like, having... It was, like, kind of an explanation for people who have unable to carry children to term, which is a medical thing that happens to some people.
Yeah. It's also, like... Sometimes, like, young children would also... Like, the belief carried over into, like, if your children don't make it to adulthood for whatever reason. Some people felt that female circumcision would protect families from this. Probably men.
Yeah, probably.
Assumed that.
I assume probably an old man
Probably
made the decision.
And then even further, it's believed that if you had to find, like, you had to find an item that was very important that belonged to the child that died. So if it was, like, an infant or a baby, it would be, like, their hair. If they were a little bit older and had, like, a toy that they loved, it would be that. I think you could, like, speak over, like, a stone, and that would work too. And you would have to, like, bring it super far away and bury it so that that spirit would be lost and couldn't return to the family.
Tied to the kind of going along with the thought process, which carries through a lot of, like, paranormal and, like, stories of hauntings and things, that some ghosts and spirits are drawn to particular objects
versus people or places. Yeah.
Okay.
So that would get rid of it. And then you never had to do any of those other things.
Okay.
That kind of covers the general mythology. Obviously, you could get a lot deeper into it.
Yeah.
But, so the reality of changelings is that most often, the kids that these families and communities claimed to be changelings were usually children with neurological or physical disabilities or deformities.
Yeah.
Modern hypotheses think that usually these were children with regressive autism. And what that is that a child will seem to be progressing typically for their age, from like birth to about 2 or 3. And then certain fine motor skills and language would begin to start to deteriorate until the child wasn't really speaking at all and was displaying very significant autistic traits.
Okay.
And that can vary super widely in severity. Like, sometimes it's pretty mild, sometimes it's more severe. But what this meant, especially probably to medieval parents, was that overnight you have a completely different kid.
Yeah.
And realistically, kids that can't, in medieval era, especially for poor families, kids that can't grow up and work on your farm are a liability and therefore seem like some kind of misfortune that has been thrust upon you.
Yeah.
Obviously, that's really messed up and not at all the real case.
Yeah, accurate.
Yeah, but people didn't know how to deal with that or work with that.
Yeah, there were no... I would imagine a big part of it is that because there weren't studies about this kind of thing, or anyone really who cared to explain it in any scientific way, that because you couldn't identify any, like, warning signs leading up, that's why it seemed so sudden and overnight, like, they were replaced.
Yeah, and it's why we have, like, certain benchmarks now that we look for in, like, a baby's development. Like, okay, cool, they're holding things, or they're, like, following things with their eyes. And it's so that we can more easily see, like, okay, well, they've been progressing this way until now, and now things have changed, and so we need to monitor X, Y, or Z that they're not doing. I did read, so I'm not a part of this community, so I don't know, and I'd love to hear more from somebody who maybe has a more grounded, like, place. But I did read that apparently, like, because there is, like, an autism community, people have found kind of, like, a, what is the word, like, camaraderie with this idea of a changeling, because, like, you grow up and you never really feel like your parents understand you, or that, like, your peers understand you when you're affected by autism.
So what you're saying is there are communities of autistic people who kind of relate to that sentiment.
Yeah, that idea of, like, I must be from somewhere else. The problem really becomes when the, like, larger media that isn't part of your community then tries to buy into what you're, like, no, we relate to this thing, but you don't, and so you're making this story about us being this scary monster that's here to bring you misfortune, when in reality, we relate to this because of how you treat us.
Yeah.
And if that's off base, Tom, like, people in the comments, if that is totally wrong and you do understand this community a little better, let us know. Because I couldn't find a ton on that. I don't know where those resources are, though. Does that make sense?
That's fair.
Not my community.
Yeah.
But I'm fascinated by it. Because I think all of us have, like, a thing or, like, a character or a like, mythological thing that we each, like, this relates to, you know, my feelings in life, and we cling to that.
Well, yeah, because, I mean, when you really break down any mythological creature or anything like that, it really boils down to a single trait that is just very, like, heavily personified by that thing. Like, the fact that dragons are very covetous and greedy. Like, most stories that you read about dragons, they're going to have a hoard that they have collected and amassed. Specific things. And I'm sure that a lot of people probably relate to that in certain ways of, like, oh, yeah, I mean, I have so many buttons. I'm, like, the button dragon thing. Like, I don't know if people have ever said that. That's kind of a dumb thing to say.
I'm the button dragon.
But it makes sense.
Yeah. Well, and then there's also a disease called Williams disease that makes people's faces look very, like, elven and, like, drawn up.
I'm gonna look this
Williams syndrome. Yes, I'm sorry.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, so when children were born with that, obviously there's no diagnosis yet. Like, nobody can see where... Cool, I can pinpoint exactly what happened in your DNA to make this happen, so people assume that these must be fairy children because they look different from, you know, your 6 other kids.
Yeah.
But now we know, like, oh, this is just... both of these parents carried a genetic trait and passed it down.
Interesting.
So even though, like, there's even some, like, syndromes and diseases that would make a person, quote-unquote, more attractive, but in a very, like, unusual way. And so people felt that, like, they couldn't trust this person because they were actually a fairy, which they're not a fairy. They're just a person with unusual features.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like we've all experienced that situation of, like, knowing someone that's, like, so attractive that it's hard to talk to them. Does that make sense?
I mean, lots of people say it about me.
I believe that.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, there's, like, certain people that, like, there's something, like, about their eyes that it's, like, hard to hold a conversation and look them in the eyes unless you know them super well, because it's intimidating.
Yeah. Well, you have worked with somebody that I'll go to your place of work with my friends and they'll see this person that you work with and they'll tell me, like, no, I can't go talk to him. He's very handsome. And I'm like,
oh, yeah.
He's just this like...
He's just really strong, guys. Like...
Yeah, he's just, like... Trust me, he's just as dopey as the rest of them. Like, it's fine.
He also is a dungeon master, so, like, just get past the biceps.
Yeah, just relax. You're gonna be okay.
If you think his arms are big, you should see the muscles on his brain.
But yeah, so that's... I get what you mean about, like, you encounter somebody who seems almost, like,
intimidating,
unearthly,
intimidatingly
beautiful.
Attractive, and I can see how people back in the day would be like, clearly this is a fairy because I can't speak to them.
They've got a spell on me. But also that's kind of how people just treated, like, women.
Yeah,
but
that's
this
true.
was more common. It was more common for... It was believed to be more common for boys to be taken by fairies and replaced. And there's a lot of back and forth
Probably on account of the beards.
Probably on account of the beards. But no, there's... Boys present with, like, especially mental health way differently than girls. So... a boy with, let's say, ADHD, because I can relate to that one the most because I have ADHD. So boys will present in that very, like, hyperactive and unfocused and lots of energy, kind of the expectation of what we think ADHD is.
Yeah.
Whereas girls are much more quiet when they have ADHD. So you're not going to spot it probably until they're adults most of the time.
Not always, but... most of the time.
Commonly. So what this meant was that a family would see a change in their son that nobody was really seeing in their daughters.
Yeah.
Especially because we don't allow girls, especially in medieval Europe.
Yeah.
Girls were not allowed to misbehave, so it would be punished out of them before you would imagine that the Fae must have stolen and replaced her.
Yeah.
So I think it's less that, like, it was more commonly assumed that boys were stolen more, and more that just nobody would have noticed if their girl child was stolen and replaced as long as they behaved and were quiet.
Yeah.
Now, there is a true crime story that kind of relates to changelings.
Yeah.
And that is the Wineville chicken coop murders.
Oh.
And this is
It's a very fun name for murders.
Isn't it? Gruesome. So this is a United States story. We don't really have a, like, the modern U.S. doesn't have a version of changelings that I could find. So this is kind of the closest that we have. And it happened in 1928.
Okay.
A boy named Walter Collins went missing in March of 1928 around 5 p.m. in Los Angeles. His mother's name was Christine Collins. I couldn't find his father's name, but I do know that he was incarcerated in Folsom State Prison.
Okay.
So his father, when he found out that the boy went missing, was convinced that some former inmates had something to do with it because his father's job in the prison was to snitch to the guards about people's behavior and whether or not, like, they're breaking rules, this person isn't, this person is talking about a crime they're planning to commit when they get out, etc., etc. So his father assumed that he'd been found out for that, and that when certain people got released, they went after his family.
Okay.
However, Walter wasn't the only kid that went missing around this time. Two boys, they were brothers, named Nelson and Louis Winslow. They were 10 and 12. Disappeared a couple of months later on May 16th of 1928. When they disappeared, their parents received 2 letters. The first one stated that the boys were going to Mexico, and the second one stated that they would be missing for as long as it took to become famous. And the parents at the time said that these letters were super weird and that...
How old were these kids?
10 and 12.
Okay. That seems a little young for that business.
Doesn't it? But then it does... So I could see, like, to one side, it's like, that seems kind of like the childish idea. And at this time, like, children that went missing was, like... That went missing for a long time was very strange. And so they would blow up in the newspapers.
Yeah. I mean, and that, it also seems very believable that someone who would kidnap children would leave a note like that to make it seem like they didn't.
Wouldn't it? But it's also weird that, like...
Sounds like a note a fairy would write.
So the parents kept telling the police, like, our kids didn't send these letters. Like, this isn't how our kids write. It sounds very strange. And the police basically said, I don't know, it's probably them, though. And moved on.
Yeah, sounds about right.
So the LAPD, a little later, they didn't see any connection between Walter Collins and the Winslow kids. Couple months apart, 2 kids went missing out of nowhere. Like, their parents saw them, and then they didn't.
Yeah. Did the first kid that went missing have a note left behind?
He didn't.
Okay. So that is potentially just whoever's kidnapping kids, if they are connected, learning as they go and updating their, what's the word? Not
methods?
Methods, yes. Updating their methods.
Yeah.
Refining their craft of stealing children.
Well, and then there's another one. So, at some point in La Puente, California, police found the headless body of a young boy.
Okay.
Which also doesn't match
any of the missing children?
Any of the others. So they don't relate this, except that in a couple of months, they've found or realized that there's now 4 missing boys, and they never, as far as I know, figured out who this headless boy is.
Okay, so there was never a report of that kid going missing.
Not that they could find. And again, you have to keep in mind there's no database at this time.
That's true, it is the 20s.
It's up to counties to kind of communicate with each other. And there's so many counties in California.
Yeah, it's a big state.
Yeah. Meanwhile, around August of 1928, Illinois police pick up a boy who says that his name is Arthur Kent.
Mm-hmm.
And then they say, "Are you sure?" And he says, "No, you're right. My name is Walter Collins. And I'm from LA."
Okay.
And they say, "Yeah, sure." So then they call the LAPD and they say, "Yo, you're looking for Walter Collins."
Yo, LAPD, what's up? Quick thing.
We got Walter Collins.
Yo, we found this
Congratulations.
boy. Come get your boy.
Yeah, so they send a photo of Arthur Kent claiming to be Walter Collins to LAPD, and they show them to Christine Collins, and she says, "That's not my kid, though." And so Captain J.J. Jones of the LAPD says, "Try him out."
Old Triple J. Try him out.
Yeah, every article I found says that he just said, "No, try it out for a little while."
Yeah. Just give him a couple days, feel things out.
Like a puppy.
Yeah.
Like I lost my dog and somebody's like, "No, try this one out. I know it's not your old dog, but just give it a shot."
But I just need you to leave me alone, so please take this.
100%. So 3 weeks later, she comes back to the LAPD and she's like, "Yo, this kid isn't my kid."
All right, I took your advice. I tried it for a little bit.
Well, and she comes back with her actual kid's dental records and notes by her neighbors and friends who are like, "This isn't Walter. We don't know who this kid is." So J.J. Jones, being a reasonable person,
Yeah, old Triple J.
says, "You're a lunatic," and throws her in an asylum against her will.
I think I would know your own child.
Basically.
Yikes.
So around this time, they're receiving complaints, rather, Wineville PD, so another county in California. I forgot where we were. We just had that serious bungle by so many police departments. Wineville PD is receiving complaints over and over from the neighbor of a poultry farmer who's saying that his neighbor is severely mistreating a young boy next door. And they said, "Just a boy. That's not our problem. It's 1928.
Yeah. We've got flapping to do.
We've got, I don't know, we're throwing women in asylums."
Was Prohibition over by then? That was early 20s, right? 1920 to 1933.
Oh, I was close.
13 years of no booze.
Oh, they were drinking booze.
Oh, yeah. But I'm sure that's where most of government funding was going at that time. Or not most of government funding, but most police funding at the time was going towards finding bootleggers and things of that nature.
Yeah, they didn't care about missing kids.
Yeah. Does it smell like he's making moonshine in his chicken coop, too? Then leave us alone.
Then we don't want to hear about it.
That doesn't sound like our problem.
So, they just... So many of these stories I read about that all of the tools are here for you, police department. Please just use them. And they say, "No. No, thank you. Maybe later." So in August of 1928, Christine Collins receives the wrong child. In September of 1928, a woman named Winifred Clark calls LA authorities and says, "My son, my 15-year-old son, has been kidnapped by my 21-year-old neighbor." Winifred is in Canada. She's not even in the U.S.
Oh.
Her nephew's name is Gordon Stort Northcott, and her son's name is Sanford.
Sanford Clark?
Yes.
Okay.
So Jessie Clark, Sanford Clark's sister, is like, "Well, I'm going to go check it out." Because the authorities, again, were like,
Meh.
"Nah."
Is it a speakeasy? Not interested.
Poultry farm, you say? I'm not worried about that. Have we received any complaints about a poultry farm recently? Oh, we have. Is it a speakeasy?
Not interested.
Just boys being abused? Nah.
Yeah, boys will be boys.
Boys are abused every day. Moving on. So, Jesse Clark is like, well, if the police aren't going to do anything about this because it's not a speakeasy.
This is still in Canada, right?
Jesse Clark is in Canada.
Okay.
Her brother is with her nephew in Wineville, California. So they're in the U.S.
Okay. Hang on. I'm confused.
Okay.
So, the kid that she's saying was kidnapped from Canada and taken to Wineville?
That is how it seems to be.
Okay. Also, the fact that this is all taking place during Prohibition era in a place called Wineville is hilarious.
Brilliant, right? So at this point, this kid has been missing for 2 years. So by the time his sister comes down to California to check things out,
Mm-hmm.
he's now 17 and his cousin. If somebody is your parents' nephew.
His mother's nephew would be his mother's brother's son, which would be a cousin.
Okay.
Because that would make their parents your aunt and uncle.
Okay. So, to go through a quick family tree now to clear all of this out.
Yeah.
Winifred Clark
Mm-hmm.
is the mother of Jesse Clark and Sanford Clark.
Right.
Sanford Clark and Jesse Clark are the cousins of Gordon Stort Northcott. And Sanford Clark has been kidnapped by his cousin Gordon Northcott.
Okay. And taken to Wineville, California.
Yes.
Okay. From Canada.
From Canada. So, Gordon Stort Northcott.
Stort.
Gordon Stort Northcott.
That is a name.
Yes. It hurts to say. Has a poultry farm.
Ah.
Him and his immediate family have a poultry farm.
Okay.
Weird. Jesse Clark is like, well, listen, you're not going to give back my brother, so I'm going to come down and stay with you for a few days.
Mm-hmm.
Because the cops are busy, I guess.
Yeah. Going vigilante on him.
Yeah.
Cool.
So she's there for a few days and realizes very quickly that her good old cousin Gordon is severely abusing her brother, and in the very few days that she is staying on this poultry farm, he attempts to attack her too.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not really surprised,
No.
but also, yikes.
Yeah. So on September 15th, 1928, Sanford gets away and gets to the police and informs them that he's been kidnapped by his uncle for the last 2 years and has been physically and sexually abused during this time.
Mm-hmm.
And they say, oh, right, we got a call about that.
And they say, was he running a speakeasy?
Is there any booze there? And he goes, what? What?
His bathtub. Was it filled with gin?
He goes, no, it's filled with blood and chickens.
Not interested.
But Sanford also has some other information for them.
Ah.
He says that he's been forced by Northcott to witness the abuse and murder of Walter Collins, Nelson and Lewis Winslow, and several other boys. He also says that he witnessed the murder and disposal of a young boy whose head was removed and left in La Puente.
You don't say.
Weird, right?
It's almost as if all of these things are connected. And the police could have known if only they had been paying attention.
Right?
Or, responding to calls.
Yeah, doing anything except, I don't know, smoking cigars.
Yeah. And drinking bathtub gin. Confiscated bathtub gin.
Yes, evidence. They're
Yeah.
checking the evidence.
Mm-hmm.
So Sanford Clark tells police to go look for the graves of the missing boys near the chicken coops on Northcott's farm. And he tells them there might not be much left because he used lime on the bodies, which, eats up
Yeah.
pretty much everything.
Yeah, it's like a very acidic powder.
I think it's a powder.
Yeah.
So they go and check out. They start digging up near the chicken coops.
Mm-hmm.
And all they found was bone fragment, but they could tell that it was human bone.
Yeah.
So then...
It's pretty damning evidence.
Isn't it? So then they go and check out the inside of this house, and they find a book checked out by one of the Winslow brothers.
Mm-hmm.
They don't know which, it just says Winslow.
Does it say what book it was?
I didn't find that information.
No, I'm just curious.
Yeah, that would have been cool. They find more letters to their parents that were never sent,
Mm-hmm.
a child's whistle, and several Boy Scout badges. I couldn't find a number, and I don't think I want to.
Yeah, I wonder if the letters that they found that weren't sent to the parents
Were actually written by the boys?
Well, I wonder if they were actually written by the boys or if they had the same handwriting as the letters that were sent. Like, I wonder if they were planning to go to Mexico and become famous and then got picked up on the way.
So, the problem with these letters was that they did start talking about handwriting analysis,
Mm-hmm.
but the language got so fuzzy about who wrote what and where and how, and they start talking about this Arthur Kent kid and some handwriting analysis,
Yeah.
and they start talking about it all at the same time.
Yeah, it just becomes a big jumble.
So yeah, I couldn't place what was where and decided to just not talk
fair.
about it at all because it didn't talk about the content of the letters. So immediately I'm like, well, then I...
Yeah, and I mean, clearly it didn't lead to any conclusions.
Yeah, but they do indicate, sort of, that these letters were most likely written by Nelson and Lewis, the kids.
Okay. So yeah. So it's very possible that they were planning to go and find their fame in Mexico for some reason.
Well, they don't think that those original letters were written. The letters that wound up with the family, they don't think that those were written by the boys. From what I can gather, is that the boys wrote letters and then Gordon copied their handwriting to send letters to the families.
Okay.
But the families were like, this is not quite right, and the
Yeah.
police ignored them anyway. So he could have done anything.
Mm-hmm.
He could have probably sent a hand, and they would have been like, man, I just don't know. I don't think it's evidence, really. I think they're probably fine.
Smell it. Does it smell like booze?
Can you smell the hand for me?
Not interested.
Please, ma'am.
Get me a stogie.
The biggest problem with everything that they found here at the farm is that they didn't find anything that they could directly link to Walter Collins.
Okay.
So they find this crime scene, they realize that a bunch of these other murders were connected, and then they go back to Christine Collins and they say, your son Walter is here.
Mm-hmm.
You have him. Look at him in his face. That's Walter.
Yeah, you look him in the eyes and tell me he's not your boy.
And then Walter comes out and says, nah, I'm not her fucking kid.
I hope he said it exactly like that.
I do too. Well, but then, so they interview
I don't know
this
this
kid,
bitch.
and they're like, what? What do you mean? No, you're Walter. And he says, nah, this is just kind of a game for me. And he says, she had to know that I wasn't her kid too, and if she had just played along, it could have been a good game for both of us.
Oh, so he's a little sociopath.
It must be. Like, holy shit. Whoops.
Yeah, what was your favorite part of the game? The part where you got a new family, or the part where the mom that you had, the new mom you got, was sent to an insane asylum?
Yeah, which part is the fun part? Also,
Also, sent to an insane asylum in the 1920s, so she was probably getting shocked on the regs.
and probably worse, yes.
Yeah.
Little shitbag Arthur Kent goes back to Illinois, and we don't ever hear anything interesting about him again.
Okay, he goes back to his family.
Wow.
How old was this kid at this point?
I don't know. All I know about him is that he claimed to be Walter Collins and wasn't and sucked.
Yeah, and then eventually, so my headcanon now is just going to be like, maybe he wasn't a sociopath. Maybe he was just an old fairy. And they were like, one day he was just like, yeah, that's not me. Gotcha. And then just fucking bamfed back to the Feywild.
Yeah, That's the part. So I know that he probably went back somewhere, and there's probably an explanation for what he was. But, like, nobody gives that information to you, so hard to say. So we can't wrap this up without talking about what happened to Gordon Northcott, boy killer.
I think the people would like to know.
So during all of his trial, it came out that, like, his immediate family, like his parents, knew about what was happening. And his mother would sometimes make the rest of the family at least hit one of the children that he kidnapped, because then the guilt would be spread out across all of them.
Yikes.
And not just on Gordon.
That's pretty messed up, but okay.
It's a weird thing. I believe she either was put to death or received life in prison.
Okay.
Which, great, because you're nuts.
Yeah.
But she tried super hard to not have her son take on any of the guilt for this, which is probably why he is the person that he is. I didn't catch a whole lot about what was going on with his dad. It sounded to me like his dad was, like, in and out depending on the day.
Yeah.
Either he was all for it or he was all against it.
Yeah. It seems like they
What a weird family.
Yeah, it's like kind of because of, I mean, obviously the main issue here is this kid, this dude, I should say. Yeah. Who's doing the majority of the murder and abuse. But also a lot of it is kind of on the mom for pulling the whole family into it and being like, well, if he's going to be this way, then we all need to be this way. Mm-hmm. Because clearly he was her golden little child.
Yeah, I hate this whole family.
Yeah, it's awful.
Except the Clarks, who, first of all, like, Jesse Clark, who was just like, well, I'm the police now.
Yeah.
and Sanford, who was like, there's like 100 boys, you got it.
Yeah.
But Gordon Clark was sentenced to death by an all-male jury because they were all male in 1928.
Yeah.
But I think it was like a super brief jury deliberation. They were just like, yeah, duh. And hanged on October 2nd, 1930.
Cool.
And then buried on a fucking hill and was a shitbag for the rest of his life. Death. Was a shitbag even in death.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, that's the Wineville chicken coop murders. And this event, so the story of Christine Collins trying to find her son and basically being told that she was nuts for not taking this fake son, inspired the movie Changeling, which stars Angelina Jolie and other people.
Oh, Angelina Jolie was in that?
Mm-hmm. Now I'm scared that she wasn't.
Did you check?
I looked it up. I looked it up.
I believe you. The only thing I remember from that... Oh, wait, no, I'm thinking of Orphan.
Oh, you are thinking... Because you also talked about this.
Yeah.
When we talked about doing Changelings. Yes, it's Angelina Jolie. It's definitely Angelina Jolie.
Okay.
And...
I haven't seen that one.
John Malkovich.
Ah, I love John Malkovich. He's a great actor.
And, like, a bunch of other dudes.
Sounds accurate.
But yeah, it also covers, like, the Wineville chicken coop murders, even though we can't truly... Like, Walter Collins was never found. Nothing of him was ever found. Let me hit my water bottle. So they can't prove... It just makes the most sense that he was involved, especially with Sanford saying, I saw him get murdered.
Yeah, I feel like that's pretty telling. They never found the head of that kid.
No, not that I could find. And I don't believe that they ever found out who he was.
That's the weird thing to me, though, is that Walter knew about this kid, knew his name, but all of the other bodies that they found reportedly had lime covering them and were, like, eaten away, but except for this one specific body that was decapitated and just dumped. I wonder why
Well, so Sanford gave Walter Collins' name, and he gave the Nelson boys' names.
Yeah. Which that one was pretty much proven by the fact that their books and letters were at the house.
Yeah. But he didn't seem to know, like, there were dozens of other boys, and he didn't know.
He just didn't know their names.
And I'm guessing that he knew because there were he was allowed certain freedoms, but not others. So I'm guessing he saw them in papers and was like, whoa.
Yeah, maybe recognize photos.
Yeah. So I would guess that the reason that the other boys weren't found, so the boy that they found in La Puente was a Latino boy.
Uh-huh.
So I'm guessing that there's a very good, not good reason, but I'm guessing that we all know that the reason that he wasn't searched for as hard and connections weren't sought out was because in 1928 the police barely cared about these other boys that they found. Why would they search for this one?
Exactly.
And his family, who probably tried really hard to find him. And the other boys, I would guess, were probably poor. Yeah. So their families couldn't afford to put out ads in the papers because the police didn't do that stuff at that time. They weren't making sure that all of the news was out in the papers.
Yeah.
They were too busy throwing women in asylums. And who knows what else. I genuinely...
Throwing women in asylums because they just can't be happy with what they've been given.
Which is strange boys we found in Illinois. There is another story, and there was a Netflix documentary about this, about a boy who went missing in the United States, and a French guy who was an adult man, but like a small adult man, who pretended to be this boy.
Oh. That's probably the inspiration for Orphan.
No, it was another kind of like changeling situation. Like.
Well, that's what I'm saying though.
I don't think you know what Orphan is about.
Do I not? I thought it was about these people who adopt a little girl, and she's like really weird, but it turns out she's not a little girl. She's like this Russian lady.
But she's not replacing anyone.
That's true.
These are stories about people replacing other people.
I know. But I would bet that was probably inspiration for that.
No. It's not. There are stories about, like, a family adopts a child, and it turns out to not be a child. And it's usually malnourished Ukrainian women.
Yeah.
Different thing. Very different thing.
It's another episode.
It's also, like, we can do an episode on that. I will look into the Orphan story.
We don't have to. It's
for
just,
you.
I don't know why it's on my mind.
You are obsessed with it. You keep saying it.
It's just such a crazy thing to me that these people would pretend to be children.
Well, it's more of an urban legend because the only stories we can find, it's another episode.
We'll talk about it later.
I could go on for an hour about Orphan. But I haven't researched it, so do you know what's going to happen? I'm going to start talking about it, and you're going to call me out for fake lying.
Oh, it's real lying. You really are lying.
It's accidental lying. Yeah. I don't mean to do it. I think I know more than I do, and then I lie to you.
Well, thank you guys so much for joining us in this episode of Drawing Conclusions. I hope you enjoyed it. I had a good time.
I had a great time.
And do you have any hints as to what our next episode will be about?
Our next episode is about a very famous serial killer.
Ooh.
There's so many of them that it's hard to...
Well, that's good. We can be pretty vague about the details of what he did, and we'll keep them guessing until that episode drops.
Yeah. So
We'll see you guys in the next one as we talk about the lady murderer. The big old lady murderer.
Well, that just tells everyone.
And unless they don't know.
That's true. Leave your guesses in the comments.
Yeah. Feel free to subscribe to Fantasy Forge for more true crime, as well as fantasy art goodness, and all sorts of D&D things and stuff of that nature. And we'll see you guys in the next episode.
Bye.
Bye.